Everyone, this is Dr. Katherine.Kelly. I am a holistic health psychologist, author, speaker, and most importantly to me, I am a soul healing expert and specialist. And I want to talk a little bit today about how the soul shows up in everything. Now, I am in the middle of teaching my Soul Health Scholars certification for helping coaches and practitioners and educators and administrators kind of understand how the soul does show up. And it is one of those beautiful things when you really don't have to tell them what you're doing because it comes to them. Many of the people in the group, the participants, we just kind of did a little bit of a mini review about the course. And one of the first things they all said was, wow, it really does show up in everything. So I want to tell you and show you a little bit more about how that happens. Now, in the course, what I teach is I use my soul health model, which is a model I created, I'm going to say, I lose track now. I'm going to say it's probably 19 years ago now. 19 or 20 years ago. I created that model because of the fact that no wellness model out there really encompassed all of the different branches of the human condition that therapists see and hear in everyday life. You know, when you are a therapist, you hear everything. You hear everything good, you hear everything bad, you hear all the nitty-gritty, you hear the trauma, but you also start to understand how interconnected all of the different aspects of a person really are because of the fact that you can't hurt what I call one branch and not have it affect another one of the branches. So I'm going to hold this up for just a second. Again, this is my soul health model. I created this about 19 years ago. And as you can see, there's 10 key branches of the human condition. And if you really look at this, I'm going to hold this right in front of the camera for a moment, try to get the glare off of there. If you look at this model, you can tell for yourself pretty quickly which one of these branches might need a little help. So, you know, we have the physical, we have the psychological, we have the social, interpersonal, intellectual and occupational, environmental, financial. You have the sexual, the spiritual, the recreational. So you have all of these 10 branches that when you think about what makes us feel well or unwell, or in the words that I use, aligned or misaligned, all of us deal with these things in one way or another. But what people don't know, and let me back up. Every human on this planet deals with something within one of these branches, if not numerous of these branches. But what a lot of people don't know is that there is a soul side to this as well. The soul shows up in each and every one of these branches in ways that, you know, it can cause blockages. It can cause confusion for why we can't get past something. It can cause that frustration for why we feel stumped or blocked or stuck in a certain way. And as I've been teaching this course for the Soul Health Scholars Level 1 certification, it's been beautiful to see people's eyes open and realize, wow, this is how the soul works in the human condition. This is how it shows up. And so I want to just give you just a snapshot of what I mean by that, because I think it's going to really help you get a little further with understanding what the soul is and what it is that, you know, everybody needs to do to kind of start paying attention to it so that they can heal each and every one of these branches. Now, just as, again, a Soul 101 kind of primer here, since this is the video series I'm doing this video for right now, the soul is the essence of who we are. It is not a religious term in my mind. Really, it is the fact that every human on this planet has a unique essence about who they are. They have their own soul story. They have their own accumulation of wounds or experiences that seasons who they are. And so according to how a person takes care of themselves, this tree is going to be really balanced, or it's going to be off kilter, or it's going to be really wilty. It's going to be different for every soul on this planet. So I want to show you just a few examples of how the soul shows up in different branches here. Now, I'm actually going to start with the physical branch here. And the reason I bring that up is that, you know, again, as humans, a lot of times that's the only part of health that we focus on. If we have a cold and we feel terrible, that's what we focus on. If we stub our toe and, you know, it's bleeding, then that's what we focus on. If we sprain an ankle or tear a meniscus in our knees, like I did a few years ago, or whatever it might be that's physical, it creates this focal point of our attention because that is what's upset or misaligned in our lives at the time. And so we have to heal that. But what happens if you have a very kind of unique or a kind of some sort of illness or some sort of ache and pain that you can't identify where it came from or how it started? And I'll give you an example of this. I have a semi-new soul healing client that I've been working with that he called me, oh, probably 3 months ago and said, I really want help with understanding my chronic pain. I want to understand what is going on. And I said, okay, let's schedule a session. We scheduled a session. I did the meditation, and I was doing an Akashic record reading for him at the time. And an Akashic record reading is basically the energetic storage of all of the information. It's kind of like your storyline or your soul's story, as I call it, of all the information and experiences from past, present, future. Future meaning that that's going to change according to kind of your free will and how you handle certain things in life, but there's still a certain path that you're probably going to follow. But when he contacted me, I did that meditation. Before he said anything, when we got started in the session, I said to him, is your pain originating from your lower right back? And he says, yes. And I said, and is it radiating down your legs? He said, yes. And he said, it's kind of spreading throughout my body. And I said, yes, that's kind of what's happening. And he said, nobody, no physician, he did have an injury, but the amount of pain he is having is disproportionate to what he should be having from his injury. And so I said, okay, that makes sense. And then I described to him what I saw from an intuitive perspective from a previous life where his body was actually crushed. This was prior to machine days, meaning there were no cars, there were no tractors. It was basically this large piece of equipment that had fallen on him and crushed him. And there's more to the story with that I helped him understand as well. But I told him that's what is happening. It is his injury from this lifetime, which was, again, not a huge injury. It was not something that should be debilitating to him. But that injury reinitiated the discomfort that was from that previous lifetime because there were some emotional kinds of concerns and some karmic kinds of things that hadn't been resolved in that lifetime, and it was showing up in this lifetime. And so he immediately started nodding. He's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense, because he had been to many, many doctors, many, many surgeons, just trying to figure out what is going on here, and nothing was helping him. And so I helped him see kind of what it was, the soul story behind it. And then I said, have you seen or have you ever considered seeing an energy worker? And he said, well, it's interesting. I just had my first session about a week and a half ago. And I said, okay, so, and I instructed him on what to tell this energy worker to work on. And then I instructed him for what to work on while he was on the table. So basically they could work from both sides, him doing some emotional and spiritual work to kind of resolve the issue while she was also working from the outside. And when you can do that, when you can do your work while someone's working on you in that way, it's such a synergistic effect that the healing goes much, much further. So that is one example about how the soul shows up in physical health. Now, we can have chronic illness. We can have all kinds of physical concerns. I'm going to give you another example because when the wave of fibromyalgia diagnoses came out about 25 years ago, I started noticing in my clients as they were being diagnosed, or as I was actually saying, wow, I think you have fibromyalgia. I think you need to go to the doctor and have them check all the points. Because I often did that. I could hear what was going on with a person, and oftentimes it was me who encouraged them to go look into it. What would happen is I noticed this pattern with people with fibromyalgia that pretty much all of them gave too much of themselves away, gave too much of their life force away. So some might call it codependence, some might call it loss of identity, some might call it, there's all kinds of enmeshment. There's different ways to kind of look at that. But there's a pattern that I have seen, particularly with people who have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, that they don't have their own sense of self compared to or separate from other people. And every time I say that to someone who has fibromyalgia or practitioners who work with people with fibromyalgia, they all start nodding, going, oh my gosh, yes, yes, yes. So the soul can show up in so many physical ways that are never going to be identified by a traditionally trained practitioner. And so this is why it can be immensely, and I don't even know how to say a big enough word for that, immensely helpful to work with someone who understands the soul side as you're working through physical issues. Now, there's thousands and thousands of examples I can give you about physical health. So I'm also going to talk about, let me pick another branch here. Let me go ahead and talk about the psychological branch since I am a psychologist. So I am in the process of writing a book series called the Soul of Psychology series. I already have the anxiety book done. The depression book is done. So if you need that information, go to my website, you'll find it. But really, what I'm doing is I'm taking individual psychological concerns and I'm talking about both the traditionally known side from what we know in everyday human traditional modern life. And then I'm also talking about the soul side of these things. So, for instance, for anxiety is all about the energetic nature of a person and how triggerable they are. Now, from a PTSD perspective, you can have flashbacks, you can have nightmares, you can have all of those things, and those are all part of an anxiety response. Now, what's interesting is PTSD is now separated from anxiety disorders. We actually have separated them out because anxiety itself is primarily kind of an energetic, sometimes biological perspective, but it's an energetic kind of thing. It can be trained into you by watching your parents. It can be just kind of a energetic glitch within you. But this is what I'm trying to help people understand is that you can have past life experiences or past life traumas that can initiate that energetic misfiring within someone who has anxiety. From a depression perspective, you can actually have someone that, most to me, I mean, I've been doing mental health work for 37 years now, and I know that's a long time, but I started very, very young. And my observations and my work with the soul world, I've come to believe that most depression is not biological. It can be helped with medications to some extent, but you have to do somewhat of the emotional work with it. But to me, in order to get past depression, you really have to do the soul work to really kind of erase it from your soul story. The reason I say that is most depression is, again, from a clinician's perspective, we would call it like a situational depression, that it's not a clinically based depression. It's not a biologically based kind of condition in most people. But think about the human condition. The human condition is so hard and so depressing, and we have so many things that really stress us or put us under that kind of suppressive nature. And that's where I want to emphasize for depression that from a soul side perspective, depression is what I call suppression of the soul. That in most cases, there is some aspect of a person from the soul side of depression that is being suppressed. There is something about them is not being allowed to be themselves. So whether it is past abuse, whether it is a past traumatic kind of thing, whether it was that they felt contained by their parents or controlled by their parents and they couldn't just learn to be who they were, whether perhaps you're in a job that you really hate and you just feel like you have to do it, so you feel suppressed. And I cannot tell you how many people I've helped get into their right fields, and then their depression lifts and sometimes their anxiety lifts because that suppression of the soul is no longer there. If you are in an abusive relationship and you cannot speak your truth, you are being suppressed. So a lot of times the people who come to me from a depression perspective, I just start working them from helping them find their truth, find their voice, and then basically that depression lifts. We can have all kinds of psychological concerns. Some of the next books that are going to come out are about trauma and about grief and about relationship problems and eating problems. There is a soul side to almost all of those. I will mention from an eating perspective, it's not unusual for people who have eating concerns in this lifetime. I'm not saying that some of the triggers didn't come from this lifetime, but oftentimes there are links to previous lives. So for instance, if someone has lived several lives in famine and in this lifetime they can't get enough food, they just keep eating, 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 it's probably because they didn't have that access in previous lifetimes. And so for those particular souls who have experienced famine in previous lifetimes, you probably need to go back and heal some of that before you're going to get past some of the binge eating. Same thing with people who restrict a lot. Sometimes people who have been in famine kinds of situations restrict because that's all their souls know. So again, we have layers to who we are, and we can start to explore who we are depending on what the soul side of each one of these branches is. So let me pick another branch. Let me talk about the sexual health branch, because to me, this is the branch that is the least spoken about in medical school training, nursing school training. I mean, really any training, especially psychological training. We do not get trained to help people with sexual concerns, whether it's sexual dysfunction or sexual abuse. I mean, there's so many different kinds of sexual concerns that basically are not spoken about, but are experienced and lived every day. So I added the sexual health branch to my model. I don't know of any wellness model that separates out the sexual health branch specifically, and it's because of the soul's impact. So sexuality in so many ways is such a sensitive topic, such a sensitive thing for so many reasons. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of embarrassment, there's a lot of disempowerment, there's a lot of abuse that's happened, there's a lot of assault that's happened, there's a lot of religious programming that sexual health or that sexuality in general is not a good thing. And so there's so much that has to do with the soul, because if you think about the essence of who we are and you think about our identity of who we are, and yet we can't express ourselves, or we have wounds that are related to the sexual branch of health, those things are going to cause problems in other parts of our world. So from the soul side, I've said many, many times, and I've trained these participants in the Soul Health Scholars program to understand that if someone has some sort of sexual health kind of thing, and maybe they have a shyness about sex, but nothing's ever happened to them. Maybe they have a fear about sex, but again, nothing's ever happened to them. A lot of times I tell people, the wounds from previous lifetimes are carrying over. So if you think about a female souls have been sexually mistreated for centuries. And if you are carrying any of that energy along into this lifetime, it's going to make itself known in the discomfort of a person's sexual comfort in general. And so I literally have had people contact me. In fact, about 2 years ago, I had a woman contact me for an Akashic record reading. And she said, I need to figure out what's going on. I have a wonderful relationship with my husband, and yet I'm really afraid of sex at times. And number one, I said, well, we can definitely go in there. I will do the meditation, see what has happened to you. But I told her right out that from basically a gender heritage perspective, she was a female soul, which meant she did have sexual kinds of concerns that had been layered on her from a traumatic perspective moving forward. So I did do the meditation for her, and we talked about it. She did have several instances that she was raped and abused and mistreated sexually many, many times in previous lifetimes, which again, if you're a female soul, you're probably going to have a lot of that. And so I helped her understand that part of it, and helped her understand kind of how to get some help in this lifetime so that she can work through some of those things. So we did some other past life work. I recommended going to a therapist. There were other things that I kind of helped her see that could be helpful for her to work through. From a sexual trauma perspective, when it comes to the health of your tree, I tell people of all of the forms of trauma that are out there, and many of them are devastating. Many of them definitely hit us at the soul level. Although, from a sexual abuse or a sexual trauma perspective, in my experience of working with people and in my experience of having some things happen in my own life, I know that sexual trauma hits us deeper than any other form of trauma. We are supposed to, in the fairy tale world of sexuality, supposed to have these beautiful, wonderful kinds of experiences when it comes to, being intimate and having wonderful experiences of making love. And yet there's so much trauma that is related to this branch. And so one of the things, and that is the primary reason I added that to this model, but one of the things I emphasize is that essence of who you are gets very deeply wounded when there is sexual trauma that has happened either in this lifetime or previous lifetimes, or both. So these are just a few of the ways that the soul shows up in our human condition. Now, I am walking through, in every book that I write, I'm walking through how the soul shows up in each and every one of these branches. So it's one of those things where if you are interested, if you have anxiety and you're curious how anxiety shows up, then go to my Anxiety Treating Body, Mind, and Soul book. If you have depression, you can go to the Depression Treating Body, Mind, and Soul book. If you are a healthcare provider and you're still trying to figure out how to recover from your experience during COVID, you can go to the Healer's Path book that I wrote. There's basically, so much to know about the soul side of health, and I can't help but just keep bringing this information to the world. Keep kind of cracking some seals for people to understand there is something deeper going on, and if people understood the soul, they would get past a lot of the blockages that they have. So again, this is just a primer. This is one of the reasons why I'm doing this Soul 101 series, is just to kind of wet your whistle and get your toes in the water of understanding that there is something deeper. Now, if you were interested in knowing more, you've got my books you can go to. You can continue looking at videos. If you're a practitioner and you really want to learn how to integrate this, you can go to my Soul Health Scholars page. Another cycle is probably always going to be offered, now from now on, and that's kind of where I'm going. This is teaching what I know to other practitioners and coaches so that they can help other people in this way. But just know that the soul shows up in everything. And whatever you do, know that there's a human side to something and a soul side to it. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I would love to see your comments.